And today I just wanted to highlight the fact that in humanities, there's so much scope in terms of how we use skills in research, in collaboration, and to really see how we can have that learning agility to apply that inside and outside of the classroom. So I think that humanities is just a beautiful environment where we can curate the capacity of students in making decisions and how they navigate their role in participating in that discourse.
Welcome to IB Matters, a podcast for those interested in learning more about IB education. We interview teachers, students, and educational leaders around the world to learn how the International Baccalaureate Framework of Education has improved their practice and how you can use it to improve education in your school. Hi folks, welcome back to IB Matters, and I have one of my favorite guests with us today, Novadene Miller, and this is her third time on the podcast, and I'm going to ask her to remind you of some of the previous ones, but I had a lot of fun speaking with her before, and she is in international school just outside of Geneva, Switzerland, and so she reached out to me recently about some of the things that are happening, and one of the things we're going to talk about, among others, is the connections to teaching the humanities, the skill sets that students get in the humanities courses, and how they connect to skills that they build up in all the others. And like anything in the IB framework, it's, the whole thing is built to show connections and help students see those connections. So welcome back to the podcast, Novadene. And why don't you start by reintroducing yourself to everyone? Many maybe didn't hear you before. So let's meet you.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me again. So, as you said correctly, I work at Institut International de Lancy, which is an international school in Geneva, and we have an area called Lancy. And it's a bilingual international school. We have students from 3 to 19 years old. And so we do IB, and we have IGCSE, and then key stages for the lower school classes.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have a French section, so they also offer the French bac.
Okay.
And now recently, they're going to soon offer even a bilingual diploma for the French section as well.
Okay.
So it's an international school in a nice small area, well, not small, medium area of Geneva.
Mm-hmm. So you've got quite the experience in a lot of different places and with students of kind of different backgrounds as well. But now you are in this international school, and
Yes.
one of the things that maybe talk a little bit about your education, because that's one of the things that's fascinated me about you in getting to know you through these conversations.
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that today.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk about my own experience as a student because I did do my PhD in France. But what was so unique about my experience was that I had an international jury. So I had an international jury composed of University of Cambridge, University of Lorraine in France, where I was principally based, which is in
Mm-hmm.
the east of France, and also University of Avignon, which is in the south, and University of Le Mode in Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
So in Europe, there was this new law that was passed where if you're able to submit your thesis at a good quality level, you could have an international jury and have like a bilingual paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to do my research in sustainable development, in particular the sustainable development of water in forest space,
Mm-hmm.
and to do both an approach in sociology and geography. And so one of the things I found really phenomenal about this experience was the fact that in Europe, they have what's called University de Grand Region project. And basically, it's a collaboration between Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and Germany. So as a researcher, as a doctoral student, I was able to, for example, go to conferences at each university, do research, be involved in groups. And I was actually elected as a doctoral student to represent humanities. So imagine coming to this part of the world and being able to do conferences, being able to travel to different regions and to experience that as a student already. And I just thought that phenomenal that
Mm-hmm.
they could have that mobility between different places. And I think that also led to my experience as an international student. I was able to
Right.
do conferences like in Martinique, be able to publish, be able already to be exposed to just in that, paradigm of
Yeah.
learning and how in such close proximity, you could have access to different resources and a different approach to research.
Yeah.
So I think already as an international student, I was able to see the benefit of different perspectives, different contexts, and how that can be used in a positive way in research.
Yeah.
And so I think I also see the benefit of that as a teacher to go for that pivot
Yeah.
in terms of being in an international context in Geneva and the paradigm of international perspectives, global discourse, different levels of development, different levels of power, different levels of governance. And I think it just adds to what I see as the classroom itself.
Hmm.
So that's why I thought I'd just say a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because even as a student, for instance, I was forced to not just look at it as a Jamaican, but as a researcher, as a scientist, and to reevaluate how I looked at space, indigenous communities, maps, etc.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that drew me to you in our first conversation was this, this
Okay.
comprehensive background that you had, and thanks for filling that out even to a greater degree here today. But as you've brought that to the classroom in each of the places you've been, and no matter how old the children are or the young men and women are, depending on the age,
Yes.
that you brought that. And for someone like myself who kind of grew up in a fairly homogenous situation with a lot of not much international input at all.
Yeah.
I just have found that it's inspiring to hear from people who have, like yourself, and also to understand and seek out ways to be more internationally minded and to look at different contexts and to see how the subject that I was, supposedly expert in the science teaching area
Yeah.
had connections to other things. And
Yes.
you're talking
Yeah.
more from a humanities teacher, but humanities
Yeah.
by itself is kind of a broad subject. Of course, so is science. But yeah, I think it's important for folks and for listeners to kind of hear from someone who's kind of lived it and also show how you've taken your own personal experiences, which is what I think all teachers have to do. They have to use their own
Definitely.
personal
Yeah.
experiences and bring them to the classroom, but to do whatever they can to be authentic with children and young people to show that. And the IB is a tremendous framework within which to do that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you've been doing lately
Yes,
because it's
definitely. I mean, IB is about inquiry-based learning.
hmm.
We're talking about a global space, a global discourse. I mean, even language, we often talk about third culture kids.
Hmm.
Um, I was doing an activity today, doing an induction in the IB program, and you had students with multiple nationalities. So language, perspectives, thoughts, it's just so dynamic, I think, and so enriching
Hmm.
to be able to hear from them from their own experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then having the ability for the students to have a platform to bring their own experience for other students too. So, and of course, in your
Yeah.
school, I think students probably expect it. They're not surprised, but that they're going to see that from their classmates. But I
Yeah.
think in an IB school in general, children need to be empowered and given the agency to share, what's important to them and the way they think of the world, and to test it a little bit to see, okay, what's my thinking? What
Exactly. And how it is that they're going to navigate that
yeah,
as
exactly.
well. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of your role as a humanities teacher and what you're doing in the classroom. And, we talked a little bit about kind of the fact that humanities brings to it lots of different skills that are used and useful in other parts of their lives and other disciplines. You want to talk a little bit about some of those things?
Sure, definitely. Um, so I highlighted three: critical thinking, research, and collaboration.
Hmm.
I thought I'd start with research. One of the things I really want to emphasize, and I've emphasized in our previous podcasts, is that the IB classroom is one of the perfect places for people with doctoral work.
Hmm.
I know research has shown many doctoral candidates. It's often said you do a PhD, you work at university, you go in a lab. But the IB classroom is such a wonderful place to use your skills in terms of critical thinking, in terms of collecting data.
Hmm.
IB has a very strong research element, whether it's the extended essay or it's the internal assessment or
Hmm.
it's now this big emphasis on the collaborative project.
Yeah.
So research, collecting data, where primary data is such a valuable way to have a comparison of what is a reality versus what is out there. And so a simple thing as collecting demographic data. And what I wanted to focus today was not staying in humanities itself, but connecting, sorry, with other departments where
Yeah.
this is concerned. And actually, what brought this about was last week we did a collaborative project in our school,
Hmm.
where it is obligatory for everyone. And in our school, the IB coordinator and the science department actually did a particular emphasis on humanities teachers coming.
Okay.
And at the end, before they were about to go out to collect the data, so this year there was a focus on sustainability in the theme,
Hmm.
and they had to go to a mall and to look at sustainable product. The IB coordinator, Dr. Matt Mahon, asked me to give feedback on their questionnaires. And I was happy she said that because one of the main points of my feedback was to the students that in humanities or in research, you need to introduce yourself, you need to categorize the socio-demographic data. And some of them are like, oh, so we were able to give our humanities skills
Hmm.
in terms of how they would organize. I was like, for example, open and close-ended questions, and just to see how in the humanities department, business, economics, geography, we could have contributed to a science project
Hmm.
and to work together towards the students going forward to collect the data in a more systematic way to look at comparative analysis. So I was going into their world of science and they were talking about, different products and what they're going to do, X, Y, Z. And I said, okay, so how are you going to approach the people? In your
Yeah.
questionnaire, you have not introduced yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, oh, we need to, yes. But for us in humanities, that's standard practice.
Yeah.
And so I found it so interesting that the coordinator, Dr. Matt Mahon, allowed me and allowed the humanities teachers to give that feedback on that and just to see how it could lead to wider perspectives.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I was saying to them, so how are you going to structure that? When you go to do your questionnaire, what are you going to do with that interaction with people? Is that going to be linked to solutions? Is that going to be linked to management? What does sustainability mean? Are you assuming that they all know what sustainability is? So I think in as a humanities person, there's so much skills in terms of collecting data and even understanding data that's already collected. Um, Newspapers, for example, I think that's often neglected. Cartoons, poems, communities that are not necessarily writing things down, but you have information in music, in language. I remember when I was doing my research, my own doctoral work on the forest in Copy Country. I mean, what I could learn about the value of water from poems, from music, from language,
Hmm.
the symbol of life, from
Wow.
different generations. So I think that we will come back to this later in an activity I did with my year 7 class, where we did an activity linked to International Day of the Boy. And I asked them to ask the perspectives of the parents and grandparents. And they could say, Miss, my dad and my grandfather had two different views
Yeah.
on, the value of boys in the society or the history in terms of how values are valued or how boys are interacted in the society and how we should see this day. And so just by a conversation of
Yeah.
talking to different members of their family, we could see generational perspectives, we could see
Hmm.
institutional structures, we could see so much. So I think I do value internet and all of that, but I think the value of students understanding, speaking even in your family to different ages,
Hmm.
to different genders, to different language, to different contexts, country contexts, is so enriching in terms of collecting data. I was able to see even from maps. I even had to recreate maps because there are maps that didn't represent the view of the indigenous communities, such as the Maroons. There are maps that, it's like each one had their own map.
Hmm.
But where we are today, we need to take the perspectives of everyone. So we need to take the perspective of the government of an area. We need to take the perspective of the geographers, the geologists. The geologists may say minerals not are here, while the indigenous communities may say minerals are here. And indigenous communities will have a value of the social construction of the space.
Yeah.
So I think in humanities, we can offer a lens in terms of culture, in terms of social construction, in terms of primary data. And also, so that was in terms of research.
Hmm.
And I would say also in terms of critical thinking. We live in an era where, in an age where there's a lot of noise, we could say.
Yeah.
So what is critical thinking itself? How do we analyze? How do we navigate information? How do we put information with the context of space? And so I believe that that's something I really want to be able to emphasize and to look at and to discuss.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just going back just a little bit to what you said earlier, I think that it's fascinating to me that when you're talking about a subject that, I think in language and literature, they use the term different types of texts, so our
Yeah,
cartoons and maps and things are actually a
yeah,
form of text that you
yeah.
can use in different ways. And I think it's an eye-opening way of thinking about different perspectives, as you said, but also different sources. I mean, when you mention going to poetry or historical stories of water to understand how important water is, and always has been to different people, but in different ways. You mentioned indigenous
Yeah,
populations. I mean,
yeah.
their understanding of the role of water in their lives and the amount of time it maybe, depending on where they live, what it took to gather water and to keep it safe. And a geologist might be looking at, well, here's the water table, and here's where the springs are, and now we can, take waste and move it this way. Whereas indigenous people are looking at a long-term sustainable way of living with the land.
Exactly. And there's so much things that come out of that. Well, you're emphasizing information literacy, media literacy, and the strategies linked to that. And also in terms of I could give an example of something I did today, just to illustrate what you
Sure.
said, in
Yeah.
terms of hexagon thinking. So as you were just saying, how is it that we use information? How is it that we use words? How is it that we analyze something? You have hexagon thinking. I have here an example
Oh, you're
where
holding up some hexagons in a bag. Yeah.
yes, where it encourages critical thinking, collaboration, and exploration of concepts and different ideas between them. So basically, the students arrange the hexagons in a web or a pattern, and then they create a connection between these concepts. So just to take exactly what you're saying now, I asked them to think of a world event, two resources, and see the link, and then stack the hexagons together.
Hmm.
So, for instance, they would think of a world event. Some thought of the World Cup, some thoughts of the Paralympics,
Hmm.
some thought of the war that's taken place.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, interesting. And then I said, can you think of two resources? Some thoughts of food, water, energy. But just to see how they thought of a world event or what was crisis.
Hmm.
And then they thought of different concepts linked to that. So, like, you would have start simple, okay, maybe water for construction of the building. And then,
Hmm.
okay, can you think of concepts linked to that? And it would say, okay, miss, like food security. Um, but just to see a simple idea of that, for example, something with sport, and then going to things matter such as inclusion, like gender inclusion, including persons with special needs, or some will talk about, well, no, this is sports. It should be a place of competition, sorry.
Hmm.
And just to see, taking, for example, what you said, questions of language or what information would we take and how far we went with that, with a
Hmm.
hexagon thinking of me not imposing my ideas,
Yeah.
but them coming with theirs and leading to an analysis of it. So I agree with you totally that information, whether it's from poems or whether it's from internet or whether it's from the newspapers, that it definitely does add to the dimension of thinking and what we can get out of it.
Yeah. So in that particular exercise, do you end up with hexagons connected all across the table? Kind of, it just
Yes,
becomes a
it was incredible.
great big
Yeah,
puzzle. It looks like a big puzzle.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So we had going across the table, and then they were looking at different parts of the world, and some were saying, but I don't think that's important. For example, food. Why is that important? Why is that here? I said, well, it can lead to conflict in
Yeah.
some ways,
Yeah.
and there are some things that won't be represented directly in the information. Like we can think about governance, politics, why are they interested? So it lets, and then you get everybody involved because you're not focusing on if I'm answering or not answering.
Yeah.
You're just focusing on expressing your ideas, and you're seeing students coming together. And even there's an activity where we had students come back. So I was like, okay, you can take the lead on this. I was like, yes, miss, I got you. So then you were able to see the collaboration
Yeah.
skills and then, even the words, the vocabulary, etc. And they said to Mr. How will this link? I said, this will be the different ideas we brought up today would be points for applied themes for an essay. And they're like,
Sure. Yeah,
ah,
yeah. Well, think about that. The idea of hexagons. It's hexagon's 6 sides. It's a manageable number that you can
yeah,
draw from, and it makes interesting
exactly.
geographic shapes. But I think, imagine a lot of people think about things in just imagine you had a bunch of arrows. A lot of people think that they're just linear.
Exactly.
It goes from A to B to C to D, so it doesn't ever
Yeah,
branch. And the hexagon really gets kids understanding and adults as well understanding how branch things are. Nothing's simple. Everything's pretty
exactly.
complex.
And
Yeah.
you also brought an excellent point. We live in a society now that's less linear and now circular. So
Hmm.
we live in a society now, and that's also something I brought out. So you gave an excellent point, John.
Hmm.
The fact that resources in our society, we're now concerned with how we can reuse, how we can replace, and how we can have these resources lasting. And that brings me back to how this can be linked to IB.
Hmm.
So you were asking, how is it can we use these skills to IB? Well, in particular, in IB, we talk about content, and context. And in geography, we're concerned with scale, so spatial and temporal scale and perspectives. So one of the key concepts we focus in geography is place, and place is physical. You have disparities, you have resource. So even when you think about a hexagon, we can think about how is it that these ideas are linked to, place, how it's linked to processes, how it's linked to human and physical mechanisms. For example, migration, as you said, a linear economy, how it is linked to questions of power, like the ability to influence.
Hmm.
So this is where I just want to show how we can highlight in humanities paradigms of the society. So it is interacted it is linked in many different ways, just depending on how we're going to navigate it. And in an international classroom, it's just amazing. So we can think about concepts of power, for example, with humanities,
Hmm.
the ability to influence, questions of equilibrium, questions of governance, questions of institutions, players, processes, and just the natural world. So I think in terms of the humanities aspect of it, that is where we come in terms of navigating the world and how we influence their perspectives on that in terms of critical thinking in particular. So I think in terms of affective skills is also very important in humanities. And again, coming back to the idea of there's such an overload of information from
Hmm.
different places.
Yeah.
I think we have a role to play in terms of integrity, in terms of ethics, in terms of how you manage information and how they manage themselves as well. And good example of this for me would be my involvement in the Mun Club.
Hmm.
So one of the things I love about Switzerland is that you have all these international organizations. And in being in Switzerland, I've been given an opportunity because in Switzerland, teachers have objectives that we are able to have and work towards. And one of my objectives was in terms of seeing this in a practical way outside the classroom. So MON is Model United Nations, where they have to write working papers, come up with resolutions. They're on different committees. So, for example, they can be on a committee. In our case, we participated in a conference, a Moon conference at the EPFL, which is the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, in March 21 to 23. And what I loved about this was it was a mixture of high school and university students.
Hmm.
You have high school students leaving their traditional mode of just being with students their own age. And the chairs of the conference for this one were university students.
Okay.
So they were like, Miss, this is not the same level. The way you
Yeah.
conduct yourself, you can't just get up and like you raise your hand, want to go to the toilet, a model for a personal motion, and then the way they need to communicate, the way they need to have ideas, not just with emotion with the ideas, but real context, real
Hmm.
practicality,
Yeah.
So
Support for ideas, things like that.
right. So the theme for this conference was migration and sustainable development, proactive solutions for a new tomorrow. And so they were actually on the International Labour Organization Committee. So looking at migration and the workforce and futuristic scenarios. And I remember during the conference, they came in with breaking news. And it was actually breaking news from the New York Times.
I was wondering,
And
I saw
article
that in your notes. Is it actually something that happened in real time?
Yes, it was
Okay.
something that happened in New
Okay.
York Times on some policies being decided with migration in the USA.
Yep.
And so there are students that were actually representing that country. So they had to see how it is that like they were doing there was Bangladesh, someone representing Bangladesh and so they had to come up with making policies, making resolutions, making amendments all in real time
Hmm.
with persons from different schools on their own with the chair and navigating their ideas, passing their motions. So they were challenged to see persons from different parts of the world, to see how they conducted themselves. They had to dress up, in suits and
Yep.
everything,
Yeah.
and I like, mixed we need to dress up. I said, what is the standard? So just to see, as you said, exactly, they had to respond to this post from the New York Times, and the key players in the article needed to respond. So I thought it was amazing. So I think the affective skills are also important to be able to develop. And in preparing to come here, I actually spoke to someone who's a diplomat and was asking her, what does she think the students should focus on for the real world of,
Hmm. Right.
because again, in Geneva, there are lots of meetings with different governments and countries. And she said, curiosity. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And that's true. In IB, we talk
Hmm.
about inquiry-based learning. But again, just the idea of being curious, being able to have a thought, hold a conversation,
Yeah.
with someone, I think that's also very important.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think that is, again, uh, this is an IB focused podcast. And so I kind of always kind of use that lens myself. And I just, everything you're talking about is something that IB gives kids space to do, to be able to be inquirers,
Yeah,
to develop their agency, to develop their ability to
yeah,
do individual orals with their instructors,
yeah,
to do research,
yeah,
and it's a big tent. There's room to, you're doing the Model UN, which is not
yes,
explicitly part of the curriculum, but
yes,
it sure dovetails with everything you're doing, especially in a humanities
yes.
course.
Just developing different skills, and communication is an important skill
Mhm.
that they need to have. So you can have great ideas, but if you can't communicate that idea and have an audience, skills are really important in terms of collaboration, in terms of critical thinking. And for me, I guess the question I'm asking myself is how do all these skills align later with evidence? So yes, we have our assessments, yes, we have our essays, but how does it align with having learning agility
Yeah,
then, if we're to say per se, of having evidence of those skills being able to be applied outside of the classroom
yeah,
to
yeah,
the real world that we live in
yeah. So
today?
the term you just used was learning agility. Is
Yes,
that, yeah,
learning
what
agility.
a cool thought. I mean, that's a pretty good purpose for education, isn't it? Learning agility. And I think, just riffing off of that right away, it's like, I think so much of our education, at least the experience that I've had here in the US, is that there's
Yeah,
this sense that we need to go back to the basics. We need to just
I
make sure you
agree.
can do these specific tasks, which people have
Hmm.
done for 100 years, when in
Yes,
fact, in the world the kids are growing up in learning in, learning agility is such an important thing. I mean, even us, me as an older adult, you as a young
Yeah.
adult, uh, it's the way I learn things as I go do research. I am using all the resources at my just
Yeah.
fingertips here that I'm staring at my computer right now, using it a lot
Yes.
to learn things that I want to learn because there's a need for me to learn it. So I need some learning agility. And I think if you don't have that, if you're let your learning joints get sore and stiff, you're not going to
Yes.
actually keep learning.
Yeah, exactly. And we can see that when we look at today, where, I mean, you had companies that a couple years ago, they were at the top and they weren't able to
Oh
adapt, they
yeah.
weren't able to evolve. And now, I mean, so I think that's really
So
important
true.
in
So
terms of
true.
how we can influence having balanced thinkers,
Yeah.
how we can influence having persons who can think, who can have ideas for themselves,
Hmm.
who can curate thoughts and concepts and agility, as you
Hmm.
said. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, you think about even in something in economics, and you think of some of the blue chip companies that founded and built our current infrastructure.
exactly.
The biggest ones
Yes,
in the world, if they're not agile, they're gone. The investors
exactly.
leave, go to the next thing, and big names like are becoming, formerly unknowns become the big names like the Nvidias and people like that. Whereas the IBMs of the world have to kind of keep up and figure things out if
Exactly.
they want to be relevant. And that's you know, teaching young people how to do what we did, 20, 30, 50 years ago is not going to get them ready for the future. I mean, they certainly have to
Exactly.
have some basic skills. There's certain things they have to have, but this idea of, I'll keep using your term, learning agility, is a critical piece for our education in the future.
One of the things that I saw today, so I have a class called Global Perspectives with the lower school, the year
Hmm.
sevens. And one of the things I try to do is to keep in contact with what's happening in the society. And so it was recently International Day of the Boy.
Hmm.
And so I said to them, okay, we're going to discuss this. And I had a student lead the activity. Yes, so I asked one of the students to co-lead. And she said, Miss, can I do something? Can I have an activity? I said, okay. And she took this piece of paper out and she said, imagine this piece of paper is 20 francs. So, okay. I said, I'm discovering the activity too, like you guys.
Yeah.
And she said, would you want it? And the class said, yes. And she threw it on the ground. And she's like, imagine I stepped on it. And she stepped on it. Would you still want it? Yes. And she went on and she gave different scenarios. And she said, well, this is the same with worth. And for her, her idea with International Day of the Boy had to look at was for her, it was a video she saw, and she wanted to bring out the concept that the worth of boys, and then she gave the link with her dad and granddad and different views on the value of boys.
Uh-huh.
When we did an activity on International Day of Girls, International Day of Women, I asked them to create posters. So now there are these posters. It may not mean the same to everyone when they see the poster on the wall,
Right.
but for me, when I see this set of posters and to see that each group or know when they do an activity,
Yeah.
they're trying to think what special needs. So they had superhero persons with, I was like, wow. So for
Yeah.
me, to come back to the point, I think affective skills and being sensitive to the classroom and different environments and what they want to talk about in different contexts and different ways is just phenomenal. What
Yeah.
what opportunities we have.
Yeah. Yeah. And just empowering the students. They are at the center of their own learning. And as a teacher, I mean, you have the intellectual humility to let the students lead, and sometimes it's real because they're better at better at traveling through the subway system
Yes,
than you. And other times
yes,
it's like you're risk taking, saying, okay, I'm not sure where she's going with
yes,
this piece of paper that
exactly.
represents 20 francs. But yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly, exactly. And when she said, I said, okay, I said, I will discover this just like you. And it went really well.
yeah.
So
Hmm.
I agree with you. Allowing students to lead, that was such a phenomenal point, John, is
Hmm.
also important because they have ideas too, that even resources, tools, like even knowing choosing the group, they have this thing where they do a wheel so that we can have
Hmm.
mixed up groups of different persons And yes, I agree with you
Mhm.
100%. Allowing students to lead in different ways in
Yeah.
terms of how something is planned or something is organized, who is represented, who is included. I agree with you
Mhm.
100%.
Yeah. I was thinking back while you're talking about kind of the way school, for me, I was always happy to be right as opposed to recognize that I had ideas, so
Yeah,
I think in schools we often reward students for being quote unquote correct or right because
I
they
agree.
got the answer you were asking for. Whereas
Mhm.
what you're describing is more, and letting the students know they have ideas that have worth. And you use that term in your example of this particular activity with the International Day of the Boys. But they're all the students can recognize that they personally have worth, and gosh, how powerful is
Yes,
that in terms of
yeah,
their future intellectual learning agility?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, I agree. It just made me think of our internal assessment collection, data collection we did about 3 weeks
Yeah,
ago. And the weather wasn't the best for us this day, John.
yeah.
And I said to myself, well, we're gonna see how they react. And talk about agility. There was one part in the city center in Geneva, it's in Bel Air, and the rain was falling, it was pouring.
Yeah.
Just the way how they would navigate the road, or there was at one point where we arrived, the plan we stopped to do, the stop was closed. And they're like, and at the same time, there was also a manifestation. There was a group that decided to do a strike on that day. But just to see how they were giving suggestions to each other and what we should do or what we should not do. Miss this for this or that, it's closer, so we should do here. And how they were doing the different stops in the pouring rain, John, the
Yeah.
pouring rain. But again, collection of data on that day wasn't just about the geography skills
Hmm.
to collect data. That day was also about being able to manage the
Manage.
reality.
Yeah.
There are people striking. Where are we going to go here?
Yeah.
Not to build too long on that, but I agree with you that
Hmm.
allowing students to lead makes a very big difference when they're confident too in being able to
Yeah.
lead and
Yeah.
the solutions that they could come up with.
You've shared a number of links. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that we were heading towards today, or anything you want to share about the links that I'll be putting in the show notes?
Yes, so I have put my LinkedIn on it so they can also see in terms of different projects that I've been involved in at the school in Switzerland in particular. And I also shared an article. So if you want to have an article that was done with Dr. Bruce Purdue from Routledge.
Hmm.
And I wanted to highlight it because recently I was at a conference in Geneva where all the geography teachers came together. And we're talking about indigenous communities and using resources. And I found that it was useful in discussions. I just wanted to say if someone wants to have an idea of how we can see in a land space. In my research, I talk about the Coptic country of the forest
Hmm.
and how we can see, for example, resources and the value with traditional knowledge. That's mentioned in that article. And
Okay.
Dr. Bruce Prideaux is just so excellent in Australia in looking at indigenous communities and sustainability and research. So if someone is interested in that, that's something they could look at as well. So, for instance, there's chapter 13, which was written by myself, Opportunities for Developing Tourism in Coptic Country. And why I wanted to highlight it was also I see that right now we're talking about TOK as well, where there's a lot
Hmm.
of focus on Indigenous communities and culture. And in this book with Dr. Bruce Purdue, you get to see the forest from the perspective of different countries and how it's valued. So, for instance, in my research, I look at the value of traditional knowledge
Hmm.
with the Maroon community and how they use water, the value of traditional medicine in the forest and how we use it in research. So I think it's a really good resource in terms of indigenous communities, sustainability, and how it is we can use these resources and how they're viewed in different countries and cultures
Hmm.
um, in that way. So I think that's why it's so important books like this, how they give the narrative of each person in the story, the local
Hmm.
person, the
Yeah.
government, the community, what space are they allowed to share or to visit.
Hmm.
So these are concepts that are really phenomenal. And especially now where students have TOK and their exhibition, and
Hmm.
I think there's students often see this as abstract, but isn't really
Yeah.
abstract
Yeah.
actually when we take some time to delve into it.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you're sharing that. The information you've given me does not have a link. Is there anything that you can share that's like people without buying the book could read part of it, or is that pretty much they need to have the book?
But I think there are some good summaries even if they
Okay.
can't
All right.
read the entire book. The abstracts are really good. Yeah. So the abstracts to the book are really good. When in on any social media platform available,
Okay.
there are some good abstracts of, so it will give you like an indice of something to do further research in
Yep.
different areas.
Okay.
If that's something, one reason I want to highlight it because there are lots of students wanting to do geography, and I don't think they've realized that you can actually focus on different geographic spaces.
Yeah.
So even today, in our school, we have, as I said, the induction where the year 11s are getting to see the IB program.
Yeah.
So now in today's society, students are already seeing you can be a marine researcher in an area, you can be someone who focuses on the forest. So I wanted to highlight that
Yeah.
for future
Yeah.
persons who are thinking of humanities or geography, you can specialize in an area of the forest, you can specialize in an area of the ocean, you can specialize in collecting data on the population of people,
Hmm.
and that's really important in your afterlife of school
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
today.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted to highlight the fact that geography today, you can specialize on indigenous communities in Canada. There is such a phenomenal scope of that. So
Yes.
I just wanted to highlight the fact that if you're interested in geography, you can focus on a specific space, a specific biome, and there's so much, geosystems, maps, cartography. Whether you want to look at matters as even now, research has shown occupational therapy and the benefits of being outside in
Hmm.
these spaces. So architecture is linked to these spaces. So I just thought it would be a good link to see
That's good.
one biome, one aspect, and how it can be viewed from different parts of the world.
Well, that's awesome. So I really appreciate having those extra connections. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share before we say goodbye?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. And last time we spoke about the classroom being a place where people can be connected in different ways with transitions from one environment to another.
Hmm.
And today I just wanted to highlight the fact that in humanities, there's so much scope in terms of how we use skills in research, in collaboration, and to really see how we can have that learning agility to apply that inside and outside of the classroom. And being able to cultivate that skill of how students navigate the multiple of information,
Hmm.
what is true in terms of literacy and educating us, or what is a diversion, or how those perspectives are shaped, and what opportunities and what position they have as a decision maker for the future and for today. So I think
Hmm.
that humanities is just a beautiful environment where we can curate the capacity of students in making decisions and how they navigate their role in participating in that discourse,
Yeah.
whether today or in the future, because they're the one who are going to be deciding in a couple of years, John.
Yes. I know. I
And
know. It goes
hopefully we'll
fast.
have more documentation of it as well.
Yeah. Well, that's beautifully said, and I think everyone's going to want to be in the humanities after hearing you. So thanks.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Novadene.
My pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Please check out the show notes for those links from Novadene. There's also a link in the notes to directly text us with comments, suggestions, or to let us know that you'd like to appear on a future episode of IB Matters. Let me put in a plug for a new podcast from my friend Phil Evans. Phil's podcast is called Education by Design, and his show, in only a few episodes, has already shaped my thinking about some of the big issues we face in education. Check it out. I have it linked in our show notes as well. We now have over 130 IB Matters episodes covering a wide range of subjects. To help you find topics of interest to you, use our podcast webpage linked in the notes. Find all our episodes wherever you get your podcasts and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future programs. Join our over 4,000 followers on Twitter Also help us spread the word about IB by liking, sharing, and reviewing the IB Matters links in your own feeds and social networks. In our time on the air, we've been heard in over 180 countries, a testament to the global reach of the IB.